Hello, and welcome to the Magic Lantern DVD guide for the Nikon D90. Now, the D90 is the successor to the D80 and offers serious photographers a compact and lightweight digital SLR with many of the specifications, features, and characteristics of Nikon's D300, but with a price tag that's hundreds of dollars less. The 12.2 megapixel resolution, blazing fast performance, and dozens of customization options give the D90 enough versatility to compete effectively with any digital SLR on the market. It's an excellent camera that will have you shooting stunning images for years to come. But like all of today's cameras, the D90 has a lot of features and controls that can be confusing to understand at first, even for experienced SLR owners. And that's why I'm going to cut through the clutter and teach you what you need to know to get started shooting great pictures with the D90 right away. Now, I'm going to assume that you already have an understanding of basic photographic terms and concepts, because the purpose of this DVD is to focus specifically on how the D90 functions, so that you can choose the setup options and shooting techniques that will work best for you. Now, if you want to learn more about general photographic topics like composition, f-stop, shutter speed, and depth of field, then I suggest you watch the Magic Lantern DVD called Great Photos with your digital SLR. In it, I explain the basics of exposure, the differences among various types of lenses, tips for good composition, the use of creative exposure settings, and much more. Other resources you'll find helpful are the many great books on digital photography from Lark Photography Books. So let's get started, because we've got a lot of ground to cover. I think the best place to begin is to take a walk around the camera and get familiar with the functions of the external buttons, switches, and other controls. Then we'll go back later and take a closer look at most of them in other chapters of the DVD. I recommend that you get your camera out and follow along with me. Now, at times, you may want to pause the DVD to experiment with the settings and try things out for yourself. Also keep in mind that sometimes there are several different ways to achieve the same result. I'm not going to stop and point them all out. I'll show you one way, but don't be surprised if you discover a different way that works even better for you. Let's start on the top of the camera with the power switch. Now, to turn the camera on, I just rotate the switch to the on position, and it's ready and waiting by the time I can put my eye to the viewfinder. Now, at times, you may want to illuminate the LCD control panel so that you can see it better in low light, and you can do that by rotating the power switch a little further, and it will light up for a few seconds. The control panel shows you a lot of information about the current camera settings. In fact, there are about 24 different camera settings that can appear at various times on the control panel, including the flash mode, the battery condition, shutter speed, f-stop, the release mode, the remaining capacity of the memory card, the metering mode, the autofocus mode, the selected focus area, image size, image quality, and the white balance setting. Learning to understand what all of this information means and then how to change the camera settings represented on the display will be very important to the quality of the pictures you take. We'll be learning a lot more about all of these settings throughout the rest of the DVD. Nested inside the power switch is the shutter release button. Pressing it halfway down will activate the autofocus and auto exposure functions so that the camera can start making its calculations for taking the best picture. Fully depressing the shutter release button momentarily will fire the shutter once, and holding it down while the camera is set in continuous shooting mode will fire up to 4.5 frames per second. Now that's fast. Next to the shutter release button is the metering mode button for determining how the camera calculates the exposure for each picture, and the exposure compensation button that can be used to override the automatic exposure settings. To use either control, you just press the button down while you turn the main command dial at the rear of the camera to cycle through the choices. Next, there's the release mode button. There are 6 release mode choices on the D90 that control what the camera does when you press the shutter button. Most of the time, you'll want the camera to take just one picture only, but sometimes you'll want it to fire off several pictures in a row. Or maybe you'll want to use the self-timer so you can run over and get into the picture yourself. Changing the release mode is accomplished the same way that other camera settings are changed. You just hold the button down while you rotate the main command dial. The choices are single frame. This is the mode you'll use most often. The camera takes one photo each time the shutter release button is pressed. Continuous low speed. The camera will record from 1 to 4 frames per second, depending on how you've programmed its menu setting, while you hold down the shutter release button. The default speed is 3 frames per second. Continuous high speed. The camera will record up to 4.5 frames per second until you release the shutter button. Self-timer. Using the timer with the camera mounted on a tripod delays taking the picture by several seconds after you press the shutter button. The default length of the delay is 10 seconds, but it can easily be changed to 2 seconds, 5 seconds, or 20 seconds by changing the appropriate menu setting. Now 10 seconds is good if you want to go over and get into the picture, but a 2-second delay is often used while shooting at slow shutter speeds to give the camera a chance to settle down after you press the shutter button, thus preventing blurry images. The final 2 release modes are delayed remote and quick response remote. Both of these require the use of an optional remote control for releasing the shutter without even touching the camera. The next button is for changing the autofocus mode. There are 3 choices for how the camera focuses the lens. They are auto select, single servo, and continuous servo. We'll talk more about each one of them later in the focus chapter. Over on the other side of the camera is the mode dial for selecting the camera's shooting mode. Now the D90 has 11 different shooting modes that determine how the camera calculates the exposure, fires the flash, processes the image before saving it to the memory card, and even how the autofocus system works. The shooting modes range in complexity from fully automatic, where the camera controls everything, all the way to fully manual, where you have to do all the work yourself. In fact, they can be divided up into 2 groups, the advanced modes and the point and shoot modes. The particular mode that you choose to use at any given time will depend on what you're shooting and how comfortable you are with changing some of the camera's settings yourself. But choosing the best mode for any given situation will make all the difference in how your pictures turn out. We'll take a detailed look at the different modes in a later chapter, and I'll have some suggestions as to which ones to use, when to use them, and which ones to avoid using at all. On the front of the D90, you'll find a number of other controls. Starting at the upper left corner, there's the sub-command dial, not to be confused with the main command dial we saw on the rear of the camera. The sub-command dial's main purpose is to set the aperture of the lens when you're shooting in the manual exposure mode. Over here, this small light actually serves 3 purposes. First, it functions as the autofocused assist illuminator by shining a beam of light to help the camera focus when you're shooting in dim lighting. Second, in self-timer mode, it blinks while the timer counts down. And third, it helps reduce the chances of red eye whenever you're using the flash. Below this light is a special programmable function button that gives you instant access to any one of 10 functions that you choose. You can program this button to do things like turn off the flash temporarily, display a framing grid in the viewfinder, or even to change the exposure metering method. Below the function button is the depth of field preview button. And when you press this button, the lens closes down to the actual aperture it will use to take the photo, so that you can get an idea of what the depth of field will look like in your picture. Moving over to the other side of the lens, this switch is the focus mode selector, and it offers two choices: manual focus or autofocus. Next is the lens release button. One of the great things about having an SLR is the ability to change lenses to suit different shooting situations. To remove a lens from the camera, make sure the camera is turned off. Then press down on the button, turn the lens clockwise, and take it off. Now to mount a lens on the camera, again, make sure the power is turned off. Align the index marks, slide the lens firmly into the mount, then rotate it counterclockwise until you hear it lock into place. Next is the bracketing button, which is used to turn on and off bracketing. Bracketing is an advanced feature that makes it easy to capture multiple images of the same scene with slightly different exposure or white balance settings, and then later on you can choose which one of them looks best. Just above the bracket button is the flash mode button, which is used to control how the flash functions. And in some shooting modes, it will also release the built-in flash and activate it for shooting. Now when you're done with it, just press the flash back down until it locks into place. Now for more flash power, less chance of red eye, and extra creative control, you can also attach an optional external flash to the hot shoe. On the left side of the camera, under these two rubber covers, you'll find 5 jacks for connecting the D90 to other equipment. The first jack is for attaching Nikon's optional GPS receiver so that latitude, longitude, altitude, and time data are saved with each image's metadata. The next jack is for connecting your D90 to a television monitor with the supplied AV cable. That way you can view your pictures on a TV instead of the LCD. However, the HDMI port allows you to view your photos on a high-definition monitor for dramatically better picture quality. The required HDMI cable isn't included, but if you have an HD TV, get a cable for the camera. You'll be amazed at how great your photos look on a big screen. Next, there's a standard USB port for connecting the camera to a computer or even directly to a printer. And finally, there's a port for connecting an optional AC adapter that is sold separately. On the back side of the camera, you'll find the greatest number of dials, buttons, switches, and other controls. It might look complicated at first, but don't worry. Once you've learned the basic layout, you'll be able to change any setting you want quickly and easily. The most dominant feature on the rear of the camera is the impressive 3-inch LCD monitor. And just above that is the viewfinder, which is clear, bright, and a pleasure to use. In fact, one of the best things about taking pictures with an SLR instead of a point-and-shoot camera is having a high-quality optical viewfinder. There's a full array of status information shown in the viewfinder, including the focus points, the in-focus indicator, shutter speed, aperture, and the remaining capacity of the memory card. Before you start shooting, you need to take a second to focus the viewfinder optics to suit your own eyesight. You can do that by turning the diopter adjustment dial until the data displayed in the viewfinder appears sharp. Next to the diopter adjustment control is the auto exposure lock, auto focus lock button. We'll see how it's used later. We've already talked about the